Hello and welcome back. Today I'm going to be working on this Camellia japonica. The story behind this tree is that I imported it a number of years ago. Of course, all the camellias are appreciated for their flowers, and this tree is no exception. It has a beautiful sort of mottled color, pink and white flower. And Camellia japonicas are a species or subspecies that flower in late winter to early spring. So it's now very early spring here in South Africa, and the tree has actually just finished flowering, and it's now already going over into vegetative growth. The camellias flower on new wood. So what this means is that the growth that will now occur during spring and going in through the growing season, the tree is going to flower at the tips or at the ends of that growth. So you need to bear in mind, obviously with bonsai, it's not all about the flowers. We also want a good looking, or we have to consider the aesthetics of the tree as well. And so you need to make sure that the pruning that you do now allows for the tree's development over the season that is to follow. Otherwise, you're going to have a tree the next time it flowers, it might have beautiful flowers, but it's going to look very much like a bush, branches sticking out all over the place, and not very nice. So one of the things that I'm going to be doing today, firstly, is to prune the tree back, and then I'm going to be repotting it. The tree is actually just finished flowering. Unfortunately, I thought there was a bud on it a day or two ago, but it must have fallen off. But you can see how that it has already started to go over to vegetative growth, and so now we need to catch it before it goes any further with this and do our pruning. Camellias are broadleaf evergreens, and as you've also seen, the leaves are fairly large. So when we are going to repot, we're obviously going to remove a fair amount of roots, and this, if we don't balance that energy, if we don't balance the growth below the ground with the foliage on top of the ground, we might weaken the tree substantially. So part of the process before we start the repotting would be to reduce the amount of leaf surface area as well. So the first step will be, of course, to prune, and then to prune back, and for that I'm going to be pruning back to 2 leaves, and this is kind of the gold standard when it comes to pruning camellias. And then after that, I'm going to further reduce the leaf mass by doing a form of, a leaf cutting. So it's not really defoliation, but you might consider it to be a form of partial defoliation. This camellia was last repotted probably 3 or 4 years ago, which is actually too long. It should be repotted more frequently than that. But I must say I overlooked it, but I'm getting to it now. So as I mentioned, in order to reduce the long shoots, so that to allow for development over the following season, I'm going to prune the shoots with the branches shorter, and I'm going to be pruning them down to two leaf buds. And so over here you can see there's an old leaf here which we're not going to count, and then I've got 1, 2, 3, and then we've got several buds here. You can actually see that at the base of these 2 buds that you have or leaves, you have 2 dormant buds. I'm going to prune because you know, obviously you're going to allow, or you would like, a certain degree of ramification or distance between the crotches or the forks in the branches, and then ideally also you want to prune to a position where the bud is growing to the outside. So this is the best place leaf to cut back to. So I'm just going to continue working through the tree, reducing the length of these branches. Now, to prevent further leaves from withering and dropping off of the plant after you've done the repotting, I'm just going to cut these leaves in half and I'm cutting them. You can't fold these, so you need to literally cut twice, just give it a slight angled shape, and it looks a little bit neater. And I'm going to go through the tree and reduce all the leaves by half. There are a few exceptions when you're pruning the leaves off. You can see over here that this is a very strong bud, and so in fact you can actually cut the entire leaf off, and so in effect you're going to be doing to a degree a energy balancing on the tree as well. Then sometimes you'll get situations like this where you've got 3 leaves. So we've cut back to two leaves, and we actually don't need this leaf. In other words, this length, I don't want a bud necessarily or a branchlet to necessarily grow out here, so this leaf can be pruned off. After pruning back, and you notice certain thick branches maybe that are growing beyond the profile of the tree, or that have become too coarse that can be replaced, you can then go and prune those branches, reduce them, and then we're going to wire this into position. So I've now completed pruning and thinning and cutting the leaves, and now I'm going to go over to wiring. Now it's best to wire camellia with aluminium wire, and it's best to do that if you can before the wood becomes too hard, because camellia branches become quite brittle once the wood is hardened off, and this makes it a lot more difficult to put some wire on them and change their shape without risking damaging them. Now finished wiring the tree, and just before proceeding to repotting, I'm just going to clean the trunk a little bit, and I'm using a soft nylon brush just with plain water, just to remove the algae growth that has accumulated. So with the trunk now cleaned, I'm going to move on to the next step, which is to remove the tree from the container and proceed with the repotting. Of course, the wiring and all the work that we did before this, it's best done before you repot, because obviously you don't want to disturb the tree once you have repotted it. You don't want it to move around at all, and obviously all that wiring and moving the branches is likely to disturb the tree. So it's best to do all of that work before you repot the tree. So I'm just using a sickle to create a small gap between the tree and the container, which will help me to remove the tree from the container. This is a Yamafusa container, and so I just need to be careful to not damage the inside of the lip. So you need to work at a slight angle with the root sickle, angle it away from the lip. Once you've made a wide enough gap, then you should be able to lift the tree out of the container. Before carrying on with the repotting, working the root system, I'm quickly going to prepare this container again. I'm going to plant the tree back into the same container. It doesn't need to be any bigger. So I'm just going to clean this out, give it a good rinse, and then put new drainage mesh in. So after securing the mesh in place, I'm going to put some wire on to secure the tree into the container. I'm just going to use aluminium wire, and I would also not really suggest galvanized wire because it does tend to rust, corrode away and break because of it being essentially under the soil and almost constantly moist. So aluminium is really the easiest or the best to work with, and probably the most commonly used. Just pull that through and bend the wires so that they're not in the way. And now the container is prepared, and we can move on to working the root ball of the tree. First thing I'm going to do is just to remove the surface soil. You will generally find that this will be broken down. I was using pure Kanuma to plant this in, or that is what I am using, and so you'll find that on the surface that Kanuma is largely going to have broken down, and you'll find a lot of surface rooting. So we're just going to scrape through that first, and then we get down to whole Kanuma particles below that. Okay, now I'm going to proceed to working the bottom of the root ball. The roots of camellias are actually quite brittle and break easily, but it's important that you clean all old growing medium out, and fortunately they do produce new roots very easily. So I'm just going to finish cleaning, removing some of these roots and just chunks of old media and roots, and then I'm going to go and wash the root ball off. I've now washed the roots of the camellia, and I'm now going to move to the next step, which is to pot it back into the container with fresh media. I'm using pure Kanuma, and so what I'm going to do is just put a fairly thin layer at the bottom, just a larger particle Kanuma. This will be my drainage layer. And then next I'm going to be putting in a smaller particle on top of that. Now Kanuma is a very, very soft growing medium. It is a little bit harder than perlite, but not too much. So you need to be very careful when working with it. You don't really want to sort of try to place any kind of pressure on it, or you want to place as little pressure on it as possible. And when I put the tree down and wiggle it down to position it nicely, you want to do that as little as possible. In fact, if you can avoid it, that's even better. However, there is a hollow underneath the trunk, and so I need to make sure that that is filled with media, otherwise roots are not going to grow in that space. Always trying to plant your tree so that the base of the tree is level, or the planting depth is level with the rim, and then that the tree is centered, or that the root system that you position it in such a way in the container that there is equal amount of space around the root ball for roots to develop. Otherwise, if you place one area right up against the rim, roots are going to have great difficulty developing there, but the roots on the opposite side, where there's a lot more space, is obviously going to develop a lot better. Once the tree is at the correct height, you can then secure it in position using the tie-down wires that you used or made provision for earlier on. Once you've secured the tree in position, you can then fill up the gaps with more growing media. Now, as I mentioned, you have to be very careful with Canuma because it is so soft that you want to use the chopsticks to distribute this media as little as possible. So you really want to work very gently with this media. You might be wondering what the advantages are of using Canuma. It's a growing medium that is particularly good for, or recommended and good for any acid-loving plants because the pH value is quite low. I think it's 6.5, somewhere around there, 6.5, 6.8, maybe even lower, depending, I guess, on the batch. But it is definitely favoring the type of growing environment that acid-loving plants do prefer. And then also because the medium is so soft, it makes it possible for the soft roots that are issued usually by a species like rhododendron or Satsuki azaleas, Japanese azaleas or kurumis, any of the azaleas really, that are it's a very thin, fibrous or fine fibrous root system. It makes it easy for them to grow because the particles are very, very soft, so they can actually be penetrated by the roots. The same goes for camellia. It's got a quite a soft but very, very fibrous, so lots and lots of roots. Canuma is very porous, and that's obviously what makes it so soft. And so it is able to absorb a lot of water, and those species or these species that you would plant in Canuma are usually water loving or do require a fair amount of water, and so Canuma is great for answering that demand or need from the species that you would typically be planting in this medium as well. I've now finished potting up the tree. And what I'm now going to do is just take it outside, give it a thorough watering, wash off any dust that might have been created just with the chopsticking of the media into those little pockets. And then I'll just be finishing off. Okay, I've now given the tree a thorough watering. Now I'm going to apply a thin layer of top dressing. And the purpose of this is just to ensure that, or just to help stabilize the soil. At the moment it's very loose, and when you water it, it's going to move around a lot, and this just creates a more stable environment, if you like, and also it does help to encourage surface rooting as well. So we're just going to put a thin layer on. It's a couple of millimeters, probably 3 or 4 millimeters thick, and this will just help temporarily to stabilize the soil. I've now come to the end of the repotting of this Camellia japonica, and yeah, it's not the easiest of species to build up ramification with. They're not ever displayed without leaves. So really the structure of the branching is there so that you have a skeleton or framework to support leaves and branches that can support or develop into flower buds. And with this tree, the attraction, or with the species, the attraction really is the glossy, very deep green, bottle green leaves, and of course the flowers. This tree is fairly old already, and it's quite established. There's no major trunk scarring really. There are a couple of smaller scars to it. One of the challenges that I am confronted with at the moment is that some of the branches are becoming a little bit coarse, and so I am now in the process. Part of the work that I did today was to prune some of those coarse branches out and replace them with thinner, more delicate branching. And I'm also hoping that this root pruning, which in camellias does stimulate foliar development as well, will produce a good amount of back budding as well that I can also use to perhaps develop and replace existing branches with. You can also graft with a species if you want to, but at the moment I think that the tree has the energy, and also now with this defoliation and opening it up, cleaning it, and of course repotting it, there's a very good chance that I'm going to get several back buds that I can use to develop branches with, and of course that's preferable then. So I do hope that you've enjoyed today's session. It's a little bit of a different species, not very common, at least in South Africa where I am. But I love camellias. I've always grown them in my garden. I love them for the flowers, and of course the fact that they're evergreen as well. They have their beautiful green leaves year-round, so they do promote a sense of continuity, which I really enjoy. If you haven't done so yet, please do like and subscribe to my channel. Hit the notification bell, and then you'll be notified when I upload a new video. This is usually every Friday afternoon that I upload a new video. So I hope that you've enjoyed the session today, and I hope you'll join me next Friday. Thank you very much for watching, and take care until next time. Goodbye.